would like to say that it's our last session of this wonderful forum. And as a result, I came to the most important conclusion that to come up with new wonderful diets, individualized, and prolong our life and delay diseases. The most important thing we have to do, we should create for all of us a lot of time, extra time, so that in 2 days of such forum we could solve problems that otherwise would take half a year. But I think that during the time of this summit, in 2 days, we probably lived through 2 weeks of our lives, information-wise. I would like us to try to see our way in the future with the help of our experts, because we were discussing all kind of diets, sometimes incompatible diets, vegetarian, vegan, diet that is, on the contrary, there are some components that are in the meat, and then we need meat, and then some diets they combine several elements but exclude the third one. And I want everyone to say at least a couple of words, very shortly, some thoughts about how we are going to go into our future. How are we going to find optimal diet for each individual person? Who are we going to start with? I'll tell you who we are going to finish with. We are going to finish with the people who are doing the most integrated profiles, Mr. Piening and Mr. Sweats. But we start probably with the people who invent new ways for us to optimally go forward to the achievement of one concrete element of our health. And probably we should ask Dr. Grossman to start, because he gave us exact biomarker we should strive to achieve.
Thank you very much, Ancha. Just in terms of a few words, perhaps you've heard of an exercise guru in the United States whose name was Jack LaLanne. Jack LaLanne, I think he is now 95 years of age, and he said, diet is the king and exercise is the queen. And you put them together and you have a kingdom. And I think there are many things that we can do to promote longevity, to promote a healthy life. We can take supplements, we can do tests of our genes, we can do detoxification, we can take hormones, but the real basis is to eat healthfully and to exercise regularly. The problem that we have is this cell phone that I have, cell phone that you have, it updates itself, it rewrites its software maybe every 2 days. But the software that runs our bodies, the DNA, the genes that we have within ourselves, it has not been updated properly in 40,000 years. So basically we are cavemen and cavewomen, and we are running on genes that were designed for survival in the Stone Age. And what these genes tell us to do, number one, they tell us eat sugar every chance you can get. Why? Because sugar can be stored as fat. Why? Because sugar can be used for energy, and for a caveman or cavewoman, if you can eat sugar and can run fast, you can survive. If you can eat sugar and have more fat, you can survive the next famine. So we eat sugar every chance we can get. We eat fat every chance we can get, because fat has 9 calories per gram. Everything else has 3 to 4 calories per gram. So it's very rich, so we eat fat and sugar every chance we can get. But when we were alive 35,000 years ago, there was not many foods that had a lot of fat and sugar in them, whereas today we can find them everywhere. How about exercise? Our genetic code from 35,000 years ago tells us do not exercise unless you have to. Because what does exercise do? Exercise burns calories. We did not have extra calories to burn, yet our bodies are meant to get plenty of exercise. The problem that we have today is we are listening to our outdated genetic code. And that genetic code says exercise as little as possible, eat sugar every chance you can get, eat fat every chance you can get. And as I look around, certainly in the United States, it appears that most people are doing a very good job of listening to their genes. So we need to overcome our genetic code. We need to exercise, we need to eat properly, understanding that it is absolutely natural to not want to exercise, understanding that it's absolutely natural to want to eat sugar and fat whenever you can, and understanding that you shouldn't do a lot of the eating fat and sugar and you should do a lot of exercise may help people to live healthier lives, even though that's in contradiction to what their bodies tell them to do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grossman. The next expert I want to say a few words is Dr. Fetissov, because he also provided in his presentation for us some particular molecules, some particular goal we need to look at, but as opposed to Dr. Grossman, who put some goal which is difficult to achieve. Professor Fetissov showed us goal we never knew about. So maybe he can tell us how we can move toward healthier diets, keeping in mind the discoveries which he showed to us.
Вы сделали. Thank you very much. I'll speak Russian, if I may. To add something to Dr. Grossman's commentary, I think that we need to tune our metabolism, not only in accordance with our genes, but also microbiota. Because if these two genomes work together, we'll get the most helpful results. If we talk about my research that I presented today, I think that the most important task is to define molecular connections for all elements, for all nutritional elements, and all bacteria, gut bacteria that can influence our metabolism. In the first place, I think perspective way is to find influence of such regulations on hormones, because hormone regulation can influence thousands of metabolites. And while we're looking for those specific molecular connections, the recommendation is now, while this research is going on, that we need to diversify macrobiotics, because all research that goes on, that diversification is always the damage in diversification always causes disease. So we need to diversify our microbiota by many ways until we understand very well all molecular interactions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fetissov. Thank you. That's a very interesting thought, especially for those who travel a lot, and we all travel a lot. We travel across different countries, and I think one of the best ways of diversification of microbiotes is eating different food in different countries. The next question I want to ask is for Dr. Khoroshov, who also posed some specific goals about carnitine in meat products, and this is a very important subject because a large percentage of population in Russia and in the West and whole nations that are adhering to vegetarian or vegan diets. And Dr. Khoroshov was saying something quite opposite about these vegetarian diets. How can we combine these two incompatible ideas? Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to start from a different end. What we heard, what we've been hearing during these 2 days, vegetarianism, calorie restriction, new diets, what happened? Where does it come from? we started to overeat. During the last 100 years, food has become available. Everybody has a fridge. There are cheap shops next door. And people who have been fasting intermittently during the last few thousand years stopped fasting. They no longer fast. Several decades ago, Russians fasted, and there were 200 days per year for large fasts and 2 days every week. Now, nutrition science is a difficult science. But nutrition science is not just nutrition, it's also fasting, it's also hunger, it's also various diets that a man should use at different stages of his or her life. As for your direct question, today the patients who are on dietary fast, I prescribe carnitine. Without that, the normal metabolism is impossible. They need to oxidize fat, but they do not have meat, and ketosis starts. So to remove those adverse effects, we have to use the possibilities of nutrition science, and I'm sure that whatever was spoken of today, any doctor who will be preventing or treating these diseases, a nutrition specialist, and there are many nutrition specialists in Russia these days, a nutritionist, and I would like to say nutritionologist, a pediatrician, a sports, a therapeutic, a surgeon, an oncology, nutrition specialist. And it's very important to have these categories. A pediatrician, nutritionists work with baby food and so on and so on, and they do not know anything about oncology, and an oncologist nutritionist cannot help a sportsman to set up normal sports nutrition. So this is a very vast science, and a specialist like that should be treating obesity using fasting and anorexia and oncology cachexia using parenteral nutrition, because these are the sides of the same coin. I'm wrapping up. We have inflammation, but inflammation is typical for cachexic types and for obesity. This is a pendulum, and there is no middle stage. This pendulum goes from one side to the next, and the reaction is very powerful, is very explosive. Diabetes leads to cardiovascular problems, and all that is connected to nutrition problems. A nutritionist based on genetics and genomics, on metabolomics, these are all the things that we need to use. The capabilities of biological science, maybe it will not be just personalized, maybe it will be group-based. One of the speakers was saying that it should be group-based and select the groups, homogeneous groups of patients, of oncology patients, of cardiovascular patients, and invent certain standards of nutrition that will be then used by groups of people, because I think it will be very difficult and expensive to calculate metabolism and genotype of every individual. It will be very difficult to find out about everyone, maybe in very wealthy people. But these group approaches should be using all the advances of nutrition science. Thank you. You stressed the importance of homeostasis, and you stressed the pendulum that goes both ways, and both sides need correction. Not just obesity, but cachexis also needs correction. And I would like to ask the next question to Dr. Tatarinova, who was speaking about ancient people. When I'm thinking about ancient people, I think of the same question. What population are we dealing with? We are dealing with the population of people who have excavated. Well, maybe they were vegetarians. Maybe we found carnivores. Maybe they were depressive Neanderthals, and that's why we found them. Can you comment on that? How can we compare those populations? How can we compare modern humans with ancient humans? How can we find any laws that would be relevant for nutrition science? Well, when we're speaking about Neanderthals, saying anything specific about the diet is impossible. When we speak about more modern graves, then we can look at the cultural layers, we can look at urns, we can look at grains, and we can make some conclusions. With Neanderthals, I think it's impossible. There are no traces of the food that they ate. And a very important point here is that you can't make conclusions based on incomplete hypotheses or incomplete data. I was giving that example already. We sequenced a small part of the genome and we're saying they were adapted for this and that. But maybe that was an outlier. Maybe we're looking at the wrong part of the genome. We have to be really very careful. This research is very nice, but you have to be very careful about that. And another thing, right now, natural selection cannot keep up with progress. For the population to adapt of nutrition changes, 150 to 400 generations have to change, and conditions change really fast. And if we do not couple people and mate them on purpose, we'll lose that. And I'm not saying we should do that. But the conclusions which we can withdraw from studying ancient populations. We can excavate graves, and it's maybe not ancient people, but isolated populations in Africa, their mutations, their lifestyle, their genetic and epigenetic characteristics. How we will use that in the future in screening of a modern patient, and we can say, well, you know, you have this mutation, which maybe will help you eat cheese but not meat, and we can make prescriptions for a specific person, but we have to understand the applicability, what we can and what we can do. All that is very interesting, but we have to be really, really careful. The generalized conclusions in the media are usually they can usually force people into paleo diets or other diets that are completely inapplicable in modern times. Our next question is for the people who have lots of experience of working with populations. They were looking at large selections of people who were going to various clinics. These populations are different. They depend on the countries where we work. So I would like to ask the same question to Professor Choi, who works in South Korea, and I think he works not just with Korean patients but also with patients from other countries. And the same question I will ask Dr. Tatiana Amirova, who works with the Russian population but also with European populations. Is there, based on your experience, are there any recommendations that you can give to people specifically for their ethnic background regarding the products that are suitable, the foods that are suitable for them?
About that. If I knew this question in advance, I could prepare better one, but kind of what to do. Actually, you know that some Eskimos, they eat 80% of diet is from animal source and high fat. But their cholesterol are fine, their cardiovascular disease is not that much high. There's certain people living in the Andes, they eat their food is their diet is 80% from carbohydrate. But
80%
still they
углеводы,
have a good,
но все равно
cholesterol
у
level
них
and body
нормальные
weight.
уровни
Certain African
холестерола,
people
нормальный,
who lives in
нормальный
somewhere,
вес.
like
В Сомали,
their
в
eat
некоторых
is
африканских
50%
странах
from animal,
50%
50% from the plants.
растительного,
But
50%
still, okay.
животного.
But who is the problem?
В чем
The
же
modern
проблема?
people who has
Проблема
a
у
lot of
современных
fat and
людей, у которых
calories.
очень
Something
много
like that.
жира и калорий.
In other words, that
Иными
when I
словами,
work on the
когда я
Mediterranean
работаю, когда я смотрю
Mediterranean
на
diet is
средиземноморскую
really
диету,
good to the
средиземноморская диета
Mediterranean people.
очень хороша для
But when we
средиземноморцев.
apply it to
Но
the
когда мы
Korean,
меняем ее
yeah, we
корейцам,
don't know.
нет.
Because the genes are different.
Видимо, гены у них другие,
Because
да?
probably to the Russian diet is could be the
Русская
best.
диета, может быть, для
So,
русских лучше
or
всего.
some of my friends who
Некоторые мои
work in
друзья, которые
Taiwan,
работают в Тайване,
he used
он
Taiwanese
использовал
traditional diet to the high risk
традиционную
group of
тайваньскую
Alzheimer's
диету.
disease, like genotyping. What she found is
генотипированию и
that
обнаружил, что
traditional Taiwanese diet is
традиционная
good
тайваньская
to
диета
prevent Alzheimer's
может,
disease compared to Western style diet. So I asked her, so,
определенные
are you
типы
recommend us
заболеваний
to eat Taiwanese diet
предотвращать.
or
А я спросил,
use
и
your
что,
own traditional diet? Okay, so if you go to the Arizona, you could see the Pima Indians. Okay, Pima is a bean name, right? Pima bean is from them. When you can see many Pima Indians got diabetes because they used to eat cactus or some Pima beans, something like that. But fast westernizing that they start to eat McDonald's or hamburger, something like that, their genes cannot control those kind of huge changes. So just got diabetes. In other words, that it takes a long time for your gene adapted to the new diet. So for you guys, your traditional diet is good. For us, our traditional diet is good. That's why currently what I'm doing is that I put several people, like 5 and 10 people into a metabolic unit. And then we gave our Korean traditional diet to the 5 people, and then westernized the Korean diet to the other 5 as a control. And then for 2 weeks. And we found that the Korean traditional diet shows a decrease of cholesterol level and decrease of fibrinogen or decrease of platelets. And then we also found that insulin is decreased and sugar is decreased, something like that. So if you ask me ethnically what, yes, your diet is the best diet to do because it does fit your genes. Okay?
Thank you so much, Professor Choi. Excellent answer. У доктора Амировой, которая много работала с русскими и европейскими популяциями.
Анча, спасибо за доверие. Я, конечно, не могу похвастаться знанием больших популяционных исследований. Я говорю только о клинической практике. Я не вижу специальной разницы между европейскими и русскими с точки зрения пищевых каких-то внутригеномных конструкций. Есть разница, как это неудивительно, в аллельной вариации генов, ответственных за детоксификацию. За семейство цитохромов, за фазу 2 детоксификации. Почему-то в России эти гены чаще бывают рискованно изменены. Не знаю, как это связано с нашей экологией последних десятилетий или нет, но это факт, с которым мы встречаемся. Я все же остаюсь на позиции, что
correction and diet should be individual. And apart from ethnic peculiarities of the patient, we should take into account his or her metabolic status. It's expensive. It's not for everyone. But we see how things change, how our branch is changing. A few years ago, you had a presentation of personalized medicine, and it was like a small child making its first baby steps. And now we have a huge audience of people who share our thoughts and our ideas. As a result, the number of doctors who work in our field grows. The cost of technologies goes down. And I think there is no turning back. So I think if we're speaking about the future is very close. For every patient at a small price, we will be able to assign an individualized diet, and it's a problem of knowledge, of technologies, and the knowledge is snowballing among the doctors. That's what I think. Thank you very much.
Dr. James Kaput, who represents a company with global reach. So we hope that he can tell us what personifications of diets could be done at the global level for different populations, and how we can do recommendations for people who were of one origin but get relocated by one or another reason to the location where they cannot eat their traditional diets and have to be in the place where they do not belong by their origin.
Yes, okay. I'll get to that. I do want to publicly, though, thank Atlas, and I think all of our speakers would also join me for putting together a very great conference. So I thank you for that a lot. And then also for our interpreters. As I listen to how fast the Russians speak, I can imagine how fast I speak, and I still understood most of what's going on. So that's great. So, yeah. So I have to go back to basics. I think we keep forgetting this. If humans had a special genotype that we needed to be healthy, we would have died out as a species. And likewise, if we needed a special nutrient or chemical in our food supply, we also would have died, because all you have to do is be in a different location where that chemical wasn't present, and if you didn't get it, then that genotype would have died out. So humans can adapt to almost every environment on Earth, and have, as we just heard from the Eskimos, Tibetan, Andean people. What we're trying to do is to optimize health. And I think we have to separate out the really cool science we do from the really neat application of trying to make sure that people around the world have at least a level playing field of good nutrition. And we don't know what that good nutrition is because we do studies in Europeans or Russians, and then we extrapolate that to people who are less well endowed in scientific research. And we have to start including peoples of the world in different genetic makeups and different cultures in order to understand how they respond to their environments and their food, and how to compare what we can do, how we respond in the European populations and Western populations versus other populations. So I said earlier in my talk yesterday, 2 billion people don't have the right micronutrients, and yet we just forget about doing research in that. And the final thing I want to just bring to the table, which we haven't really mentioned a lot, Yuri talked a little bit about this in the agriculture. Climate change is real, and that's going to change nutrient availability around the world. So we in the nutrition community have a very big responsibility to try and do our research really well but really fast, so that we can get solutions into the world's populations in different genetic populations, different cultures, to make sure that they have access to those nutrients. Because otherwise we're going to be in serious trouble down the road, both politically as well as socially and morally, by not being able to feed 9 billion people in 2050.
Thank you so much, Professor Kaput. And now my questions go to Dr. Piening and Dr. Suez, who are doing the most individual research. So they are looking at the level of every person and try to do personal recommendation, not personalized recommendations, but personal recommendations in those cases. Can you please provide your perspective on how we can scale up your very important research? Let's start with Dr. Suez.
Thank you very much, Ancha. I think that our responsibility as people that are doing basic sciences, when we try to communicate our research is to not exaggerate. And I think that no matter what I will say, someone from the public media will come and will make a very big topic out of it. I think other colleagues here mentioned it. So I think I must honestly admit there is still a lot that we do not know in our study, for sure, the personalized nutrition study. We know that the microbiota is important for the differences in the individual response for the same food. We know that if we want to predict a good or a bad diet, we have to consider both which bacteria are present and what can they do. But we still don't know how bacteria A would cause a good glycemic response and how bacteria B would cause a bad glycemic response. And I think that in order for this to become more applicable and translational, there's still a gap that we need to understand the mechanism of how the microbiome or the human genetics affect health and the glycemic response before we can scale up, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. Dr. Piening, your opinion on the same subject?
Yeah, well, I am in total agreement with the last statement. And so in our research, one of the things we're doing is starting at a very big scale in terms of molecular profiling. And we don't expect that to potentially continue forward to larger populations, but it lets us really assess pretty comprehensively, at what time, what time scales do things change? How often do we need to monitor certain biomolecules? Which ones are interesting in which subsets of people? And so doing that on a pretty comprehensive level in a smaller number of subjects lets us kind of take the things we learned from that and deploy it across essentially everyone. And at the same time, we have the technology, the cost of the technology is dropping and dropping at such a rapid rate. So for example, the study I showed today on a single person was very expensive. And so then we rolled out a study on 100 people and the cost was in the same ballpark, so essentially very similar. So I envision, years down the road, we can do many of these technologies at a pretty impressive scale for relatively cheaply.
Thank you so much, Dr. Piening. And my last question for this discussion goes to Professor Richie Kivel, who has background in business, but for some reasons he spent almost all his life with various kinds of biologists and medical professionals. So he went from one zoo to another zoo, and now welcome to our zoo. So can you provide something like a bird's view, non-medical, non-biological point of view on the maturity of our discussions? We certainly want to be in the future soon, but how far we are in the future right now?
That is great. Thank you very much, Ancha. And I think part of the reason I've been so attracted to this field is I like to be around people much smarter than myself, who have ideas but don't necessarily have the passion to commercialize them. They really have the passion to do the hard work and the research very early on. And they're often looking for people that will take it into the world so it sees the light of day. So I think that there's a couple of things that have come across over the years, but also over the past couple of days, which is that the time that we are in right now is highly unique. For those of us that are deeply interested in health, nutrition, the field of personalized medicine, we have an amazing opportunity to really harness the power of the information and data that's being collected and created every day by the great researchers in this room and others around the world. And that information can then be harnessed to impact the lives of people. And I think that's where I get my most satisfaction, and I know the people in this room do as well, where you can begin to see the work that you're doing actually impact lives and not just create more published papers or more grants. And through that lens, I think so many of us feel the emotional connection to the world of healthcare, biotechnology, and life sciences in general. It's much more fulfilling than perhaps building the next great gaming app or doing something in another field. It's not an easy field, though. So I think that this conference is a great example of the trends that are beginning to become reality throughout the world. Having this first conference here in Russia is an outstanding example of that, and it's very timely. The topics we've talked about over the past days are definitely at the cutting edge, and I truly mean that. Whether I am in Spain or in Slovenia, where I have a company in Ljubljana, or I am at MIT, the things we're talking about today are the same things they are talking about. Many of the topics we covered are ahead of those things as well. So I think the timing is right. And as a business person, I often feel a sense of urgency, as I'm sure you all do as well. And in business, urgency is about actually looking at the opportunities closest to you and making decisions very quickly, very often, without as much information as you would like. And I think that that is one of the things that I encourage all of the researchers and biologists and chemists and geneticists that I work with is don't wait until something is perfect before you actually show it to the world, before you think about patenting and licensing. Wait till something makes sense and then reach out there to your colleagues and get assistance to bring it forward. Because so many times things sit in a laboratory collecting dust for years. And it feels like many of the things we talked about today and many of the things the great speakers have been talking about are going to see the light of day very, very soon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Professor Kivel. And there is one more question, probably most important question, which goes to Dr. Milko Sokolovic, who possibly knows better than any of us the regulatory perspective and public perspective on all the questions which we discussed. Of course, we are nutritionists, scientists, clinicians, to some degree at least able to follow our own best advice. But our ultimate goal is to bring this advice, personalized advice, to everybody to improve the health of general population. So what is the solution? Where is this frontier? How we can reach this goal?
Well, I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that, and I'm also not an expert in regulatory. What I would like to pinpoint once again is that people need to be better informed and in simpler words about the nutrition and its effect on health. And also, I think that this conference proves that as well. We do need a multi-stakeholder approach and multi-actor approach, and we have had experts from different fields at this conference, from different walks of life and walks of science, from different countries, and this conference was a wonderful proof that collaboration is what matters. Also, this conference has shown that the language should not be a barrier in science, and we should keep it like that.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure whether we have time for questions or not, but I think that all experts are here. They're still available. And you can run and get them before they run away, that's for sure. I want to say a few words in conclusion of the conference. First of all, I should say that the conference made me immensely happy. And I'm sure that many in this auditorium would share in this feeling. It is an important thing to keep everybody happy, right? I mean, good food, right food, good nutrition is an important part of it, but there are other approaches how to reach the ultimate goal to make everybody happy, and this wonderful conference is a very important means to this end. Agree? So I already heard questions from many people whether we will have this conference in the future. I for now couldn't say when and where, but somehow I got the feeling that we all might meet again.
Да.